Hayden Kay. But before I do so, I would just like to also say thank you very much to Elder Butch and to you, Russ, for agreeing to come in at the end of the conference and to be present at the beginning. I think it's such a great way to start and finish a conversation about communication ethics. To hear from someone like Elder Butch, and so it's really with great gratitude that we start this last session with you both. So just to introduce Jeff, Jeff is actually starting in May his master's in professional communication, and he will not be on campus in May, because we won't be on campus, but he will be with the cohort that starts in May. He's a creative marketing and sponsorship coordinator at the Janine and Peter Lougheed Performing Arts Center in Camrose. And he's also a volunteer firefighter living in a small town called Ponoka in central Alberta. So I will turn it over to Jeff, who will be the moderator for this session. Thanks, Jeff.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. Elder Butch, Russ, thank you very much. Before we get started, we probably should do a land acknowledgement myself. I'm near Musquatchees. I'm on Treaty 6 territory, so land of Bear Hills, I guess. And we should do the land acknowledgement for Royal Roads. And now, of course, if someone is able to grab that for Royal Roads, because I closed my tab for that one, that would probably be ideal. 1 second. I knew this was going to happen. You guys were testing me and my settler memory, as they say in Musquatchees. They call us Moniao. So, but basically, I want to recognize also that Royal Roads itself is on treaty land. And I'm going to apologize because I don't have the land acknowledgement. Sorry, everybody. Let's see here. While I look for that, I am also going to just welcome Elder Butch Dick, who is from the Lekwungen community, better known today as the Songhees First Nation. You'll probably correct me for my mispronunciation. His family roots extend into Swak'wey'lupton community, today known as Tsartlip First Nations, and his grandmother on his paternal side was from Ditidat, which is part of the Yux'wey'lupton speaking communities. Butch Dick taught First Nations art and cultural awareness in the Victoria School District 61 for over 25 years. He played a vital role in co-developing much of the First Nations art curriculum for students from kindergarten to grade 12, as well as adorning many schools with his artworks, original works, which either reflected the school spirit or local traditional landmarks. As an established master carver and internationally renowned Lekwungen artist, his artwork is scattered throughout Victoria, British Columbia, and the world. His cultural works assist in building bridges of understanding around the Lekwungen peoples, past and present. And we also have Russell Johnston, who has been a guest on the traditional lands of the Yux'wey'lupton and Lekwungen families for 6 years, hailing from Anishinaabe, Cape Croker unceded First Nation, via the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe. Russ's background includes work in Indigenous community research, entrepreneurial consulting, sustainable economic development, and cultural protocol education. Russ holds a diploma in Foundations of Indigenous Learning, a Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Studies and History, and a Master of Indigenous Governance. His scholarly work navigates the intersection of emotional cognizance and traditional knowledge systems rooted in personal, familial, and communal well-being.
And Jess, can you see my screen? I just shared it. I had the traditional land acknowledgement up for you. If you can see it, I'll pass it over to you to read it.
Yeah, thanks. So and obviously I gave recognition to Treaty 6, but also Royal Roads itself is a campus located on the traditional lands of Esquimalt and Songhees ancestors and families who have lived there for thousands of years. It's a big part of the fabric of the life of Indigenous communities long before Hatley Castle was built, and it will be long into the future. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm also grateful for Inara for catching that for me and for everyone's patience while I navigated that, as well as Elder Butch and Russ for me just butchering a bunch of names here. So please, without further ado, please join in, and we look forward to your presentation.
Anin, everybody. Hello, Jeff. Thank you. First and foremost, and Butch and I know that we're going to sort of get into this a little bit more in our conversation. But it was wonderful to sit here and to be a part of your land acknowledgement. And I say that because it's the relationship to that protocol and to that piece that is the important, or I feel is the important part of those land acknowledgements. And so to hear you be uncomfortable and try to pronounce the words and to do those things is a really wonderful thing for me to see, because to me, that's what that journey is about. It's about understanding and figuring it out and going with the flow and trying to understand what all of this means. So miigwech to you for stepping into that space in the way that you did. I'm grateful for it. I really am. Hi, Butch.
Hi.
How are you?
Yeah. Jeff, thank you very much. You did really well. And when we're learning language, there's no mistakes. And we acknowledge that fact. And when we're being taught, that's the first thing we say, there's no mistakes. And you just do your best that you can. And it worked out. You know, the land acknowledgement is very important to us. And it's something that's practiced as part of our teachings. And a lot of people are recognizing that fact right now, and they call it a protocol, but we call it part of our teachings, and it's carried out constantly in Lekwungen territory. And then after you say it a few times, you know, it does catch. If you say it really fast, but don't think about it, it's just Lekwungen. So I welcome, you know, everyone that's here today, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to be part of this. And thank you for the invitation, Russ. You know, as always, it's good to see you.
Oh,
And yeah.
I'm used to having these conversations over a dark roast coffee with 2 sweeteners and 1 cream. So if any
That's
of you
right.
are curious about getting into Butch's good books, that's always a wonderful handshake to start with. And so, you know, sort of in that vein, you know, Butch, it's wonderful to see you. I know that we've spoken over the phone kind of in the last little bit, and we did get the chance to see each other in person. I guess that was a few weeks ago. And I guess before I start, you know, I would like to introduce myself in my language. So anim bojo, Sungilawakan, Indigenous Anishinaabe and Dunjaba, Wabazi Shi and Dodem, Abitan Kusupsum and Lekwungen and introduce myself in that way because I am first and foremost a visitor here on Lekwungen and Kusupsum territories, and I think about that responsibility that I carry for being a guest here on these territories every single day. When I get out of bed and I get my smudge out and I'm giving gratitude and I'm acknowledging all of the gifts that these lands and these territories have given me to be at this very moment with Butch and in front of sort of, I guess, 61 participants also, that all of those things have led to this moment, all of those gifts received and the person that I've become since I've been here in the last 7 years. I hope one day that I can reciprocate what these lands and I guess in this point, the peoples of these lands have given me. And I guess to that point, I'm going to take this moment to acknowledge you, Butch. You've been a pretty significant part of my experience here on Royal Roads since that first day that we met down in Sungilawakan. And you know, as much as it's something to acknowledge the land, I want to also obviously acknowledge the families, and in this case, you played an integral role of me being comfortable enough to be a visitor here and to carry these things forward in a good way. So, you know, I appreciate you know, all of those gifts that you've passed along. I don't think you've ever uttered the word no to me in all of the requests and all of the questions that I put your way. So in my acknowledgement of the land today, I want to acknowledge you and your ancestors and your families for everything that they've given me. So it's a pleasure to be here today with you.
Oh, thank you, Russ.
So, you know, I do have a question for you. You know, and you touched on a little bit when Jeff was did his opening, which, you know, we talked about the gratitude for these things. And, you know, it's a request that I still get here at the university a lot. You know, can you come and do a land acknowledgement for us? And a lot of the time I say no. And I think I have my reasons for that. And I'm curious about, you know, why land acknowledgements are important to you and to Lekwungen peoples, and why you think that they should be a part of the things that we do.
Well, things have changed over the years, you know, as far as land acknowledgement is concerned, and now everyone wants to do it. That includes, you know, the 40 or so teachers that I did a workshop for yesterday afternoon. And you know, it's important that usually it's not important, but typical that, you know, they get an elder or somebody from the community to go to the land acknowledgement. But, you know, those people from the community can't be everywhere at one time because we get a lot of requests. But with that in mind, you know, we produced a poster for the Greater Victoria School District that does the land acknowledgement. And it's a land acknowledgement that we use at the legislature and for other organizations and institutions, you know, such as UVic and Johnston College, and of course railroads. And it's really quite simple to us. It's easy, you know, but you know, the translation of phonetics and that sort of thing was a difficult part, and the pronunciation guide that is I guess kind of anglicized. So I will do it for you now just so that you can hear it. And it starts off with Asiem Nushjelicha, Asiem Nushwalakwa, Aishwa Kwanzana Techo, Lekwungen Tunnel, Aishkasiem Nakwilia. So really that's acknowledging the people that you're speaking to, and it says friends and family. And we welcome to, you notice the word Tanakh was in there, which means land. And this land that we're on, I guess Lekwungen actually means the land of smoked herring. So right now in the Gorge Waterway, there's herring coming up Gorge Waterway right now. And that's part of the Lekwungen people's box of treasures. There's coho, herring, and camas. So those are the trade goods that we had prior to colonization.
I don't know why I'm taking notes. I'm laughing at myself as we go through this. But I guess it's because, you know, this happens, I think, every time that we get the chance to sit together and to be together. You know, what we intend as being a half-hour conversation turns into 2.5 hours because I have so many questions about all of the things and trying to piece this puzzle together. And so in that land acknowledgement, as you say, there's an acknowledgement of the land itself, right? And the things or the the gifts that come from those lands and those spaces. And for you, why do we do that? Why is that important?
That's part of the teachings, and the language is attached to the teachings, and the teachings are attached to the land. And all of those, go together, and that explains why, our thinking and our value statements that we have, everything that we're taught really is about the environment and sustainability of the environment. So that is why they had the land acknowledgement a long time ago, when people used to travel by canoe. And before they came ashore, they used to ask to come ashore and give a reason why they were visiting the land. And they would ask if they could harvest herring, but they're not going to take more than they need. And they were going to take what they need to feed their family. And quite often they'd bring a trade good along with them to the land, so that the chief or the honorable people would exchange that with them.
So would reciprocity be a fair thing to say when we talk about this idea of coming in, let's say, and myself as a visitor and me being Anishinaabe, because I know that we have our own protocols around when we land in territories that aren't our own, and they're rooted in very similar things, right? We would never come empty-handed. We would come with respect and reverence for the peoples whose territories that we're coming to, and as a result would gift in exchange for the honor of being able to be in those spaces. So is it fair to say that that's a pretty similar sort of thing that happens out here?
Yeah, I think the protocol part of it came about with regard to what they call tribal journeys, where several nations get together and they all travel to one location by canoe. And it started off with just a few canoes. Now there's hundreds of canoes that include even, people from, I guess, what we call flatland, Calgary, and those areas, and Métis people, RCMP, the armed services, and before they come ashore, we've actually done that on near Yux'wey'lupton, when we have that canoe event down there, and they request to come ashore. And they also state, that they've been traveling for a long time and they're very tired, and they would like something to eat and then rest. And so that fits right in with what we do in the Longhouse. There's recognition, acknowledgement, and respect. Those three things are inherent in our teachings. So when you recognize somebody at the door, you usually know who they are and what nation they represent. And then you take them to have some food, and then you take them to sit down in their place in the Longhouse. And usually the way things work, it's the people who've traveled the farthest who will join the ceremony first.
Gosh, interesting. There's so many things that are popping into my head in this one. So, when I think of this, one of the themes of this conference here is ethics, right? The ethics of communication. And I guess when I think of this, in what you're saying, what I hear is certain values, right, that exist or have existed, that create a set of ethics with which your ancestors have enacted, right? And so, the value that sticks out to me is that idea of recognition, acknowledgement, and respect were the three that you had mentioned. But I'm going to sort of stick with this respect one and maybe tie it back into this idea of the herring kind of coming up the gorge, and this idea of what it means to respect those hearing as they come into this space. I think we talk about respect between human beings quite often, but something that's not talked about is our relation to non-human relatives, and maybe you could speak to what that kind of looks like between Lekwungen peoples and the herring themselves.
Yeah, I think when you talk about Lekwungen people, that means people of this land, but we also have neighbors who are all Coast Salish people, and all Coast Salish people are wolf people, and they all have the same structure in terms of their cultures, and we all practice the same way, but in separate places. It always comes to me that we're all the same but different, which is something I learned, from a teaching of the sacred circle. And that's important because, during the process of our ceremonies, we don't speak for ourselves. There's speakers in our longhouse that speak for us. And if you're welcoming canoes, it's usually the speaker that does the welcoming on behalf of the chief of that land or the honorable people of that land. So in the big house, the speaker would speak for the families in terms of what's going to happen during that celebration.
So I can't help but think of the way that we do things as Anishinaabe people. We're clan people also, and of course within our clan system, certain responsibilities fall into certain clans, and for us it's the Loon and the Crane clan who are our speakers and our leaders in that way, and they're the ones that step into those spaces and speak. Traditionally they would have been known as the chiefs or sort of kind of the leaders, but it was interesting the way that it was explained to me. Was that sometimes being in that role wasn't a very envious place to be, because your job was to speak for everybody else, not for yourself. And so that the position actually meant that your only role, not only role, but your role was to speak for everybody. And as a result, wasn't this really highly regarded title to hold, this idea of chief, right? Because in our democratic system, your job was just to be the speaker for everybody else, and how you felt was irrelevant. You were literally a public servant to everybody else in the community. Right?
Yeah, it's neat when you compare, different cultures, and I always get excited when I hear about other cultures, and I've spent a lot of time with people from the North Island and New Channel, the West Coast, and I always look at the way they sort of, I don't want to say govern, but, run their ceremonies. And once you learn one ceremony, it pretty well falls into a set pattern. So you know what's going on. But I get you as far as, being a speaker and how they can get in trouble really quick by expressing sometimes maybe they're kind of a person who likes to crack jokes and things like that, or talk about things that maybe not be appropriate. So they, usually the elders will stop them fairly quickly and chastise them.
All right, fair enough, right? Stand in line. Interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting too. I went to speak at the legislator about a month ago, and they wanted me to welcome all the people into the legislator. And my observation was that, I was very happy and honored to be there and to be able to do the welcome and the words of prayer and those kind of things. But I told them it was very awkward because they have the elected people and the opposition sitting on the other side. I said, we don't have that in our longhouse. There's not the elected people and the opposition on the other side. So I said, it's an awkward awkward way to run a house. They didn't say very much about that, though.
Well, what am I thinking now? Maybe my question is what would that look like for your people, if in that structure, right? Like it's here we have a Western style of opposition and those kinds of things within, because I think I know what they look like from an Anishinaabe perspective, but what would they look like in your communities and in your spaces?
Quite often in a longhouse, when ceremonies do take place, it's based on your First Nation name and your inherent rights as far as that name is concerned. That could involve ceremony or that sort of thing. And if you don't follow that pattern and make sure that you get permission before you even start to use the name and the ceremony that's attached to that name, you can get in a lot of trouble. So the process in the big house is all arranged prior to by the family. So the family has several meetings and they talk about names, ceremony, what's going to take place, who are you going to invite, and the typical part is, are we going to have enough food, and everything else as far as the gathering is concerned. So it's an interesting process, and it's both exciting and very tiring, because the events usually take hours and hours and hours, and and the first part of the event, you ask for witnesses to witness the event, and that's the very first part. So all First Nation men with First Nation names will be asked to witness the event. And so the family would go around the longhouse and actually the exchange, say 50 cents, was just like legal tender. They had an obligation once they take that to speak to the event and speak to the people that are either getting a name or getting a ceremonial mask or are being initiated. So there's a lot of things that are attached to like a monetary system.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think of the process that we have within our spaces back home, and that idea of even for us to get into that space, we have to all be in agreement of what it is that we bring, right? And so within our clans, our responsibilities, maybe one is education, one is hunting and protection, and et cetera, et cetera. They all have different ones. And then a representative of each one of those will come together into that space, and you'll have that speaker from each one of those 7 will come together into that space to engage and to make those decisions. But you don't go into that space until the decision is made by everybody within that clan. And if it takes 3 weeks for everybody to come to the same sort of conclusion, then it takes 3 weeks, right? This concept of time in this linear fashion doesn't really exist. What's important is that everybody in that community's voice is heard, that everybody is on the same page before any decision is even made. And so I think that's where it's interesting that concept of opposition and in both sides of the house, right, is it wouldn't even get to that stage. We would only come together when everybody was ready, and then that decision even to move camp or to go to different spaces or different things wouldn't happen until everybody's voice has been heard and that everybody was on the same page even before going, right? And so that concept of the opposition is seems like a foreign one to me to a certain extent, right? Because I mean, at the end of the day, opposition or not, we're still a community. We're still going to move forward together as a unit, as a thing, right? And it seems sort of contradictory, perhaps sometimes to the way.
It was confusing to me, because they say, I said, well, all of these people are elected because of gifts that they have. and they all come to that legislator with personal gifts, but yet they spend, 4 years fighting with each other or disagreeing with each other. And like you say, the concept is totally confusing to me. And I say, well, why do they do that? Because of their elected representing us. And if we don't understand, that system, it's very foreign to us.
Right. Both, I mean, theoretically and tangibly, really. And when we think about that, definitely. I love what you talk about with gifts there. And I love that idea, and I love that concept. And I agree with you that we're all bestowed gifts and abilities, and it's our job. And I think of, relationship to my name. So my name, I think about every single day of living up to the responsibility that comes with that name, Sungilawakan, right? But I guess at the same time, is gratitude for the gifts that come with that. And one of the things that one of the many gifts that you certainly have been bestowed is your ability as an artist, your ability as a carver, as somebody who's uses that medium to communicate. And I guess maybe a question is why do you carve? Why is art, or why has art been such an integral part of who you are?
That certainly wasn't planned. I didn't plan to be an artist. And I went to school, studied a whole lot of other things, and graduated in Vancouver and got a scholarship for the Vancouver School of Art. And that wasn't my intended path. I just was still exploring what I wanted to do when I grow up. It was, I enjoyed the idea of going there and sharing time with a lot of other artists and watching what they do. But during that 4-year process, I realized, I don't know a thing about First Nation art, because, I've learned everything about abstract art and poster art and all the other things, but I've never learned how to put together a design. So it wasn't until I got to Camosun College and studied with late Chief Tony Hunt, where he set me on the right path, and he was my mentor. Both his personality and I just gravitated to his teaching, and I took that and ran with it, and I found that wasn't what I necessarily wanted to be. And I always take the words of his brother, Richard Hunt, who said, before you become an artist, get a real job. So I worked at a whole bunch of real jobs during my life, but I still did art on the side. And it wasn't until later that I became a teacher in the school district and started designing curriculum for them and using things that Tony had given me. And when you mentioned gifts, we're at our first breath as Lekwungen people, we're gifted with the teachings and the language and taking care of the land. Those are gifts. So those are, at our very first breath, we have that responsibility to learn and to pass things on to the younger people.
And so in that journey that you've had with art, how have you been able to do that? How have you been able to, well, I know of many people that have crossed paths with you around art, and that next generation that I've spoken to that have talked to how much of a role that you've played in that. What does that mean? What does that mean for you? What does that mean to be a part of that?
I think yesterday, like I mentioned, I met with 40 teachers from the school district, and they're all First Nation teachers. And at the time I started teaching, there had to be about 4 First Nation teachers in the school district. Now there's 40 identified, Indigenous teachers.
Mm.
And some of them actually were students of mine at some of the high schools. And others heard my name and read my name on the curriculum booklets. And they said, well, finally we got to meet Butch Dick, because they've never met me, of course, but they've seen in work with my curriculum. And some of the artwork, I enjoyed doing artwork. I enjoy creating, and my sons, came along with me on that journey too. And they started carving and designing, and both of them are still doing that. And I've taught many, many more, and I still get people, that come up to me and thank me for the lessons that I did with them. And most of the time I don't even know them. And Russ, you remember that time with the lady up in the castle? And
I'm laughing because I feel like every time that I'm out in public space with you, there's at least 1 or 2 people that come up and are like, by chance, are you Butch Dick? You taught me in so and so and so and so, or I remember you from this, and this, and I feel like I'm walking around with a rock star all the time, because all these people are like, oh, is that Butch? And but I guess for me it speaks to your acknowledgement of the responsibility that you've been given, right? For you to carry these teachings on to these next generations, and to be in good relation to these people, because when they come, the smile, like there's this trepidation, and then when they like, oh, it is Butch, their face just lights up, and it's just this wonderful thing to see, but speaks to the effect that you've had on multiple sort of generations over the last little while. And it's, as a bystander, it's just an incredible thing to watch sort of unfold. And so
actually, I revel in that whole thing. It's but in terms of being an artist and having to do all these ceremonies with big people and stuff, to me, it's still embarrassing.
Well, I think perhaps that speaks to your humility, because I've had the pleasure of seeing your work and those things that you've done and that you've created, and it's an inspiring thing. And I guess this is a really general question, and I don't. It seems sort of strange to ask, but what is it that you're trying to communicate when you're doing those things? Do you think about that stuff? Is it just, maybe the question is, why do you do it? Why is it important?
I think it's part of the responsibility of passing a gift along. When you pass that gift along to young First Nation people, you don't pass it along with the expectation that they're going to learn to draw like you, because you try to find their gift and nurture it. But for the non-First Nation student, it's creating awareness about what you're doing and why you're doing that. So we made masks and canoes and everything. There's attachment to all that. And I guess, it's important to teach young people about the rules of designing and how you respect other artists. Is, I guess, what they call plagiarism and that sort of thing, which happens, and we acknowledge that fact. But it's creating a realization and an understanding that they have gifts that they haven't explored yet. And you all heard the thing about I can't draw a straight line and all the other things, and people always say that. And I say, no, you can do it. It's easy.
Mm.
Yeah.
so my grandfather, one of my grandfathers, he was an artist for CBC. His name is Robert Binks, and he drew for quite a few of the CBC sort of shows, but Mr. Dressup is one that always sticks to my mind, and that train that comes across and it unfurls and it says Mr. Dressup, and that's my grandpa. And I am one of those people that can't draw a straight line. And I remember saying this, I remember saying this to him. And he said the exact same thing that you just did. And he's like, it's not that you can't, it's that you haven't tried. And I'm smiling from ear to ear right now because it brings me back to his studio and to the conversations that we've engaged in the past. And I, just thinking of him makes me smile because of the life that art allowed him to live, and the gifts that it gave him, and as a result gave us growing up and thinking about those, what it means to I don't want to say think outside the box, but to dream and to bring things to fruition, these thoughts, these ideas, and make them concrete and make them tangible, and these things to share. And as I say, I can't draw, but writing has been something that I've enjoyed doing in the past. Mind you, my master's degree kind of ruined that a little bit, but that medium of being creative has always been an important aspect of self-care.
It's being creative, that's the whole idea. And most young people, it's not automatic, the gifts aren't automatic. Sometimes you really have to work at it, and some people are gifted and they can just start right away, including writing. And I try and write, but I write the way I talk.
That doesn't sound like a bad thing. You're making that sound like it's that's not a good thing. I enjoy our conversations in our chats.
But only one I know is question mark and exclamation mark. And a few pause in there.
Right, but and I guess this is an interesting thing, right? We're talking about the ethics of communications, right? All of a sudden we're saying that these commas, these periods, these question marks, the structure, is a part of this inability to communicate, right? Or that it's this structure that we're going up against, and takes away from the act of actually communicating in a good way. And I'll be honest, I have no idea where to put commas. I think about all the spelling and all of the things that go with that, right? But it's interesting that those boxes and those barriers that we create, right? Around what those things are or can be, that it needs to fit into this structure, this box, for it to be legitimate sort of in some way. And maybe that's where sometimes when I think about my work in these spaces that I run into quite often, it needs to fit within this system, within this box, within this idea of, and I'll just say it, Western thought and Western thinking. And I would argue that an Indigenous way of thinking doesn't fit into any of those boxes, and as a result, it's a hard thing to do. So maybe my question is, in your time working within those systems, what are some of the things that have been a difficult thing to operate in as an Indigenous person within those structures? Or if you could change something, what would some of that be?
I think last time we talked about, different professors and teachers that we've been taught by and how they talk, and with the assumption that everyone understands them. And a lot of them kind of enjoy themselves, and enjoy their words, and just assume that what they're saying is meaningful and will be remembered and is understood by everyone. And I'm one of those people that when I go to lectures and I hear different words and have to come home and Google it and say, oh, that's what that meant. And then I have to learn how to say it. And when I was in grade 11, in Vancouver. I went to school with a lot of First Nation guys from all over BC. And one of the games we used to play is that we'd find one word each day and we'd try to use it in so many sentences that it just became a game that we used. But as we were going through that process, we started to learn more about the English language. So it's, and when I started taking First Nation language, I realized that a lot of that is in the English language. Yeah, so the way it's pronounced and that sort of thing. And lately I've been really noticing a lot of words. But what really, really resonates with me is the way TV announcers talk and how prepared they are and how articulate they are. It just amazes me. And, it's not only how they talk, but their knowledge base. And you wonder, they probably went to school to learn how to do that. And we all don't talk like that, obviously. It's different if I met a bunch of guys outside the big house and we're all standing around talking, you get a different level of talk. And that changes when we walk inside the big house because we can't joke around and do things like that inside the long house. So, being appropriate is really, really important to us.
It's got me thinking so many things. But I know that I'm thinking a ton of things, and what I'm also assuming, and maybe I'm wrong there, is I'm probably not the only one that's thinking about lots of things and that has some questions. And I know how much you and I digress about having agendas and having timelines, but unfortunately within the system and the box with which we're operating today, time is a factor. Right. And I know that we have to close up by 4:15, but I wanted to make sure that we had some time to honor some of the questions and some of the comments that are coming in. And so maybe we can slide it over to Jeff and just see if there's any questions that have been put out.
Take it
Well,
away.
thanks. I know I have a question, but we do have a comment. There's a couple ways we can do this. We have a small group. I can read them, or we can get them on the mic, and they can have their own questions. What are you fine gentlemen comfortable with?
Is there quite a few questions? Sorry, I haven't been following the chat box.
No, that's okay. There's been one question in the chat. Okay. I do have my own question just from my reporting and my experience with my friends in Musqueam that hopefully would be beneficial to this discussion. So Butch, yeah, I mean, it's really up to you. It might, yeah, I guess it's up to you.
Butch, what would you prefer? Do you want to hear them come in and ask, or do you want to have them read?
Oh, they can come in and ask. That's fine.
Perfect.
And I will try to answer.
Yeah.
If they do a bad job, just give me a wave and I'll boot them out right away. Just kidding. I won't do that.
No, that sounds great.
Okay, so folks, if you do have questions, the best way to do is raise your hand. I know D. Russell had made a question in the chat, but D. Russell, if you want to mute yourself or unmute yourself, yeah, there you go, and go ahead. I'll be quiet.
Thank you very much. Why hastalhal ipisnagsil inta isquist meals. I'm an Indigenous woman living my best life in my community. One thing that I come across as a professional communicator for my government is the concepts of gender equality or discrimination when you're working in your own community that could be either matriarchal or very heavily patriarchal. So we have, of course, in this age of inclusion and gender diversity, we have people with they pronouns, or they are identifying as a gender that they were not born with. And in some cases, we have people who are very uncomfortable with those changes in our social norms. How do you address it? How do you protect it? And do you only address it when you're in your own community?
Well, Russ, yeah, yeah, thank you. You know, that we realize, you know, the changes that we go through over the years, and how things have changed in this world, and how people have changed. You know, and in our community, it's they say matriarchal, that our grandmothers run all the ceremonies, and their wives run the ceremonies also, and once in a while they let us do things. But nowadays, you know, when in the longhouse, it's different than, I guess, when we're in our homes and with our families. And I think, you know, we largely recognize everybody, and we try not to make value judgments about people because of who they are and who they would like to be, you know. And I think that's very important in today's world. And when you think of ceremonies, I think they're largely, and I keep on going back to the word governed, but I don't like that word. They're largely run by the grandmothers and the mothers. They're the ones that know the ceremonies, and they know what has to be done, and they will tell the speaker what's to happen and what to say. I don't know if that helped or not. So.
Oh, it's great, Butch. There's so many things, and when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about today, in communication and what those things mean, and maybe one of the things that, you know, maybe this is a time to think about is the effects of colonization on our people, right, and our understanding. The fact that we're communicating right now in English is a colonial construction and a forced form of assimilation, right? And I think one of the things that I struggle with when I think about my relationship to colonization is that I've lost my language. You know, I can introduce myself. I know a few words. I know some things that go with that. But what I've lost with that language is an ideology, is a way of seeing and being in the world that is rooted in the lands of my ancestors and my peoples, and the teachings that come from those lands and that way of being. And I think this sort of ties into your question in the sense of, when we talk about gender and we talk about these structures, those are colonial structures, right? You know, those aren't Anishinaabe teachings that go with that. You know, in our teachings and in our way of seeing and being in the world, there is no, that gendered concept doesn't exist, right? The fluidity of those things is much greater and much different, right? And so when I think of questions like that, I think of, what is my relationship, or what is our relationship to colonization and the thoughts that go into creating the world that we're engaging, right? You know, Butch spoke to the matriarchal societies and the roles of what those roles are within our traditional spaces. And I wonder sometimes how much of that has been shifted because of colonialism, or what we perceive to be because of the intrusion of colonial and Western ways of thinking sometimes. And I think rooted in our language and is that way of thinking about those things in a good way, in a way that doesn't fit into a Western concept of binaries and dichotomies and all of these boxes. And so I think by returning to our language and returning to the teachings of the land and of our ancestors, that we can find the answers to things like that. But it's going to take time. It's taken 150 years of colonization for us to get here. It's going to take us generations to get ourselves back to spaces where we're thinking like our ancestors. Well, if that answered the question or just made it more convoluted, but
no, it's good. You're getting more questions and more engagement. Michael Ka had a question. Michael, do you want to jump on the mic or do you want me to ask it? You can go ahead and type your answer, whatever you want. So, hello. I will ask it. Speak in person at the moment. Okay, perfect. We have a few questions. So here's Michael's that I think might be kind of interesting for you. There's a few of them. Let me just close this one window. Apologies. I'm trying to multitask. First of all, I'm a guy. I'm a white guy. I've got lots of problems. So multitasking we're working on it. So yeah, Michael asked or said, there are development projects in the Indigenous area. I found a healing villages in construction. Do you think it is an opportunity for more dialogue between the non-Indigenous and the Indigenous people?
I think the question came up at the meeting with Creative Victoria teachers, and and sort of everybody's thinking along those same terms, and they want more awareness, about, I guess, Lekwungen people, which people of this land. But what they don't realize is that we can't share everything with our culture. And I guess, with the diversity in Victoria of First Nation people from all over this Turtle Island, I guess they call it, some people share and some people don't, and Coast Salish people don't. We can share to a certain extent, but not what we call spill the beans about our culture. That's very important because we started allowing cameras and stories written about our ceremony, then that depletes the ceremony and it will eventually disappear, which largely speaks to the language also.
When I've been a visitor here for 7 years, and one of the things that I was just in awe of when I first came here was the strength of the languages, the longhouse, the practices of the peoples here, and how beautiful it was for somebody coming from my territories to see how strong and this really, one of the interesting things for me was the amount of communities sort of spread kind of all over, right? Coming from Southern Ontario, we have about, roughly another 150 years of colonization in that space. And so for us, they herded us all together and said, look, we're going to take all of these villages, all these communities, and we're going to put you here. This is your reserve. And now all of these people now have to mesh into this one concept or this one idea of identity or nation. And one of the beautiful things that I appreciate about being out here is how strong these things are because of that protection of those things, of saying that these are ours and we're going to keep these as ours. And we're not going to lose any of that relationship to what these things mean. And we're only going to share that with those who we feel should be here. And it's one thing that I'm really envious of the way that things are done out here. It's beautiful to me, and I have a lot of respect for that.
I think I can speak a little bit more to that, Russ. The idea with the school district and Camosun College and UVic is that they look at our ceremonies as something that they could do. And they emulate these ceremonies, you know, without really thinking what's tied to those ceremonies and who does those ceremonies in the process. So when they put on a blanket and put a scarf on their head, you know, they don't realize what they're doing. And they always ask us, well, what should we do? And I said, well, do things the way you do them, because it's your university or your college. And don't emulate our ceremonies again, because that waters them down.
Yeah, that's a good point. We have a few minutes. I'm trying to be respectful of this discussion and the time. We do have a few questions still. And if everyone's okay, I'm going to ask them. And if there's an issue, just pop in and Chase, and we can we can slow it down. Mello said, much gratitude, Russ and Elder Dick. I'm wondering about the land acknowledgements, and this might touch in what you were just saying. Sorry, I'm wondering about the land acknowledgements that are frequently done at school assemblies, etc. They are often just read with little understanding of the importance, and it seems they are just going through the motions. It is wonderful to hear that land acknowledgements are traditional and important in the Lekwungen culture. Do you feel it is disrespectful to do land acknowledgement just to quote unquote tick the box, or is it important to do it anyway? Does it do more harm than good?
Yeah, that's a question that's been asked, you know, by just about everyone. And I quite often get phone calls to come and do land acknowledgements and say words of prayer and those kinds of things. But, you know, what we do out of respect is that, you know, that we explain, you know, that we can't be at every event in every school. But, you know, that's why we produced a poster for some of the schools. And if they take time to learn the pronunciation and how to say it and explain it, then, you know, that's they're actually doing that on our behalf. And they're still acknowledging the land, such as even what happened to Russ if I was supposed to be there and they couldn't make it, and then, you know, I'd ask Russ to do the land acknowledgement. He's probably done that quite often, and which happens, you know, and it's we don't feel it's disrespectful, you know, if they say they're speaking on our behalf, and this is Lekwungen land acknowledgement.
The only, if you don't mind, I wonder if also I almost think of it as you know, good exposure to that culture a little bit with the land acknowledgement, and also it's practice and it's creating a positive habit. At least that's how I see it for me as well. But I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Elder Dick, just so you know.
No, sorry, Jeff. I think it's important, right? Because when I think of those things, I think of the thing that I think of is my relationship to that. That's what's important to me about those land acknowledgements, right? Is why. Well, why? Because there's a relationship here. I live here. I get to be here. I get to breathe the air, to drink the water, to eat the food, to see the beautiful mountains, to watch the sunrise. And I have gratitude for that. That's a gift, to receive those things that come from the land on a daily basis. And that land acknowledgement is a way of acknowledging that responsibility and respect that I have for the gifts that come from this place. And that's what I try to explain to people about this land acknowledgement, right? It's not that it has to look like this cookbook or this recipe. It's what's your relationship to it. It's about you. You have agency of this. You are part of that land. You are part of those things. And what do you want to say thank you for, right? And I think that's something that sometimes gets missed in this when it becomes a mandate or it becomes a checkbox. It's about gratitude. It's about being grateful for all of the things that we get the chance to have and to do and all of that kind of stuff.
With that, I think, you know, the reciprocity of that whole process is actually part of bridge building. And we have to use awareness to help build those bridges.
Thank you for that. We have some positive reaction to that. We have one last question here, but are you okay to stick around for this last question, Elder Butch and Russ? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, I was. Elder Butch is like, listen, get rid of this Jeff guy. Just kidding. Sarah Nelson said, I was lucky enough to take a class in Halkumelum in my community from a language keeper. Since land and language are so intertwined in culture, that was kind of part of my question. So thank you, Sarah. How can we push to get more Indigenous language into schools? What else can we do?
Yeah, Halkumelum is actually part of the Cowichan Nation, and Halkumelum also extends to the mainland and parts of the mainland. But within a 50-mile radius, there's 3 dialects of Coast Salish that we speak. And ours is Lekwungen, of course, and there's Johnston, which is Saanich, and Halkumelum, which is Cowichan. But there's similarities in all language. And right now we're doing a language program at Songhees that the district wants to use, but I keep on saying no, because, you know, it was designed for the community and for the community to learn the language. And it doesn't seem right to me that we go out into the community and start teaching the language if most of our nation doesn't speak the language. And that's happened. There's an example in the Saanich school where youngsters go home and start talking St. Jonathan to their parents, and their parents don't understand. And with our language, Lekwungen, there's only one elder who speaks and understands the dialect. So it's actually nearly an extinct dialect. So protection of that is really important. So I said, sure, we can share it, but there's things, responsibilities to that language that we have to follow.
You got nothing, Russ?
I guess what I think of, and as I say, I think about this one often, is what can I do in my role? What role does Royal Roads play in this? What is it that we have? What are our gifts, our skills, our abilities to help in any way, shape, or form around those ideas, those thoughts, and those things? And I think about that in my role every day. You know, who benefits from what we're doing, and are we doing enough in the communities that we honor in our land acknowledgements? What are we doing for them, not what are they doing for us? And that's what that makes me think of. What are we doing as members of this community to help and to assist and to take the wealth of resources and capacity that we have to better whatever those things may be? And it's not an answer, but you know, more of a question and more of a statement, but is one that keeps me up quite often, thinking about those things. So miigwech to everybody for your questions. I hope we did them justice in some way, shape, or form, definitely. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeff, for being the moderator. And like Russ says, I hope we answered your question in a good way and never confused you a bit more. But you know, there's cultures are very complicated, and sharing cultures are just as complicated and have a lot of responsibility attached to them.
Yes, and again, thank you so much, Elder Butch.